Has Donald Trump committed treason? It looks like a whistleblower is suggesting he has. What do we do about this? Check it out. Be sure to ding the bell. Leave your comments, subscribe to our channel, and share it with your friends. Donald Trump apparently made some kind of a promise to some foreign leader, and we'll get into the details of who that might be and what that might be. And in fact, it's all pretty unknown right now, other than the fact that somebody in the intelligence community was apparently listening to the call or had a transcript of the call. Now, keep in mind, it may not even be that they were listening on our side. I'll explain this here. It used to be in all previous administrations, and I mean, this goes back to, when they first started using telephones, that, and for that matter, telegraph before that, that when the president would communicate with a foreign leader, there would be somebody from the White House on the call who would be transcribing it, or they would be recording it, or both. And that person would create an archival record. You can find the records of many of these phone calls in the Nixon library, in the Johnson library. Sometimes they're sealed for 50 years. That's how it took us 50 years, literally, to find out that Richard Nixon committed treason in 1968, blowing up the peace deal that LBJ had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. Richard Nixon intervened just before the election so that LBJ could not say, hey, we've accomplished peace, and therefore Hubert Humphrey would become president. Instead, Nixon was. So it took us 50 years to find out. But usually there's somebody in the loop keeping track of this stuff, and a recording is being made. And in fact, now we can even hear the recording of LBJ telling Everett Dirksen, this is treason, what Richard Nixon is doing, back in 1968. But that was 50 years ago, right? So we don't know right now what happened because, A, Donald Trump took that person out of the loop. He said, I want to have conversations with foreign leaders, and I don't want there to be any recording of it, and I don't want anybody listening in. Now, occasionally in these conversations with foreign leaders, we do need an interpreter on our side. So there's two possibilities in terms of how this whistleblower got this information. Number one, the whistleblower might be the interpreter. Trump tried to get around that when he met with Putin in Helsinki, for example, and in several other meetings that he's had with foreign leaders, where he literally took the interpreter's notes and tore them up and had the interpreter sign a non-disclosure agreement with all kinds of draconian penalties. So up to this point, interpreters have not been willing to come forward and say, here, I'll tell you what the president said. So it could be an interpreter, or it could be, and I think this is probably more likely, somebody over at the CIA or NSA or whatever, within the intelligence community, who was listening in not to the White House, but listening into the person on the other side of the phone call. In other words, if Trump was talking to Putin, they were wiretapping Putin. If he was talking to, well, actually, we've got a list of the people that he was talking to in those days just exactly prior to that. And exactly what it might be, who it might be. And let me see if I can find that. I've got so much paper on this. Well, I'll get to that in a little bit. But in any case, this is here we are, the frightening phone call scenarios. It was Vladimir Putin. Now, he had correspondence with Kim Jong-un during this period of time, but it wasn't on the telephone. And this appears to be a telephone call. He had correspondence during that time with the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, and the Emir of Qatar. Now, the Emir of Qatar had just participated in a bailout for Jared Kushner to the tune of over $1 billion. So maybe it had to do with that, or maybe it had to do with Putin, or maybe it was somebody else altogether. I mean, we don't know everything that he does because this is probably the least transparent White House in modern history. So if you have thoughts on who it might be and what it might be that they were discussing, I just want to open the show today to speculation about this. I think this is a huge story that needs to get a lot more legs and a lot more discussion. And the other thing that we learned is that Michael Atkinson, a Trump appointee, who is the Inspector General for the intelligence community. And the Inspector General is like, you know, you watch cop shows, you know, and they talk about internal affairs. They're coming in to find out if you did wrong when you arrested so-and-so and beat the bejesus out of them. Right? Well, that's the equivalent of internal affairs for a police department is the Inspector General within a federal agency. And so there, you know, this guy, Michael Atkinson, he's like the cop who oversees the intelligence community. And there is this whistleblower law that was passed back in the day. And I think these were passed back in the 60s or 70s, maybe in the mid-70s in response to the Nixon scandals. That's something, you know, to look up, and I'll fill you in later when I figure that out. But in any case, we've got this whistleblower law that says that if a person in the federal government knows about a crime being committed by another federal officer, they can report that crime to the Inspector General for their department without punishment, without retribution. And in fact, once they become a whistleblower, they have some very specific protections. So that person still has their job. I guarantee you Donald Trump would fire them if it wasn't for that law. And maybe even discover that, you know, hey, 15 years ago they were smoking dope in their bedroom or something, and we're going to throw them in jail. I mean, there's nothing that I think is beyond the possibility when it comes to this guy and this administration. So anyhow, Michael Atkinson was dragged before Congress today. This is the House Intelligence Committee, and he absolutely refused to say what it was, or even who it was, that the whistleblower was talking about. So we just don't know. And Congress still doesn't know. I mean, this was reported 10 minutes ago. The meeting is still going on. They are still in the meeting right now, or at least they were as of like 4-5 minutes ago when I started this program. The Director of National Intelligence. Now, the law says that when a whistleblower reports within an agency, and with this law, it may be unique to the intelligence agency, or it may be, you know, broadly more general. But with regard to the intelligence agencies, when a whistleblower makes a report to the Inspector General in the intelligence agencies, in other words, somebody sends a letter to Michael Atkinson or an email saying, hey, I know about a crime that's being committed by a federal official, the Inspector General has to look into it. They have to seriously evaluate that claim. And they have to determine whether it is urgent and whether it's legitimate, whether it's a solid thing, right? And then they're required to send it to the Director of National Intelligence, who has 7 days to give it to Congress. The Director of National Intelligence is also a Trump appointee. He's actually the acting director. Trump doesn't believe in directors because they have to be vetted by the Senate, and he doesn't like that. So he's got all these acting directors, people who are loyal to him, but have never even talked to the Senate. And that acting Director of National Intelligence, his name is Joseph McGuire, has said to Congress, I'm not giving you anything. And it sounds like now he is saying, well, you know, this isn't really that big a deal. There's no droids in this car. Just keep moving along. Now, former Department of Homeland Security official Juliette Kayyem was on CNN this morning, and she said that there's basically three kinds of scenarios that would cause that legally these three buckets into which a whistleblower could place such a complaint. And such a complaint would have to be taken seriously by the Inspector General and by the Director of National Intelligence. The first is that Trump did something to make himself richer in his capacity as president. That's a clear violation of the Emoluments Clause. It's against the law. The second is that he told some other country that they could have control over an intelligence operation that we're running, or gave details of it in a way that would affect the direction or control of an intelligence operation. And the third is that he disclosed methods and sources. for covert action. And again, it looks like it was either Russian President Vladimir Putin, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, or the Emir of Qatar. Former FBI agent Rasha Rangappa was also on CNN this morning and said that the president has, quote, a fiduciary obligation to act in the best interests of the United States. In other words, he can't abuse his powers for personal gain. That was the first of those three things. And that the Inspector General has to look at the complaint and determine that it's credible, that it's urgent, that it is, quote, this is from the law, a serious or flagrant problem, abuse, violation of law or executive order, or deficiency relating to an intelligence activity involving classified information.